America's healthcare system and prescription drugs might actually be making us sick. Sharyl Attkisson breaks it down in under 60 seconds.
Prescription drug use, when the drugs are used as prescribed, is always a leading cause of death. You don't hear much about that.
Hold on. Say that again.
When drugs are used as prescribed is a leading cause of death. It's been #1 on some polls in many years, and it continues to be one of the lead causes. We're so over-medicated, and medicines have their flaws. I mean, certainly some save lives and have done great things, but in general, all of them have side effects, and we don't know how they interact together, and we're taking so much. But this is something that's not widely recognized today. Well, CBS was assigning me to cover, and many other reporters were doing it at the LA Times and the New York Times, Washington Post at the time. And then, about the same time, Congress stopped investigating and the news stopped reporting, and I started getting, after being told to cover these stories, it started to be that my immediate bosses still wanted them and liked them and saw them as hugely impactful, but somewhere else at the network, they were getting lobbied and called, and there were secret meetings with pharmaceutical industry people and some producers at CBS, and all that changed.
All right, guys, good Friday to you. We have made it through the work week. I hope you are ready for the weekend. What a crazy week it's been. As I said at the beginning of the week, I thought over the weekend I had all this material ready that I was going to break down with Abrego Garcia. Can you imagine this? We're not even talking about Abrego Garcia anymore. That's how nuts this is. This whole LA thing has been crazy. And the Democrats are digging themselves deeper into a ditch every single day. President Trump's doing awesome. By the way, big kudos this weekend, 250th anniversary of the Army. I hope people take the time to celebrate the Army and stop making this about Trump. That's not what he's doing. He's celebrating the Army, the sacrifice and service to so many people. The left just can't do anything without making it about him, though. It's them that are making this about Trump, not Trump. He's focused on the Army and the service and the sacrifice. Let's remember that. Anyway, today, an amazing, amazing conversation I've been looking forward to for a while. Award-winning investigative journalist Sharyl Attkisson. You've probably seen her on Full Measure. She's written some amazing books. She's got a brand new one out. Well, not a brand. It's a new book out called Follow the Science that breaks down Fauci, COVID, pharma's conflict, something that you guys have heard me talking about. I'm so excited to get into this conversation. And it's anyway, by the way, if you've been looking at these weekend rants that I do, it's a one-off, sometimes culture, where we talk about something that we wanted to get outside the show. We do it every weekend. So hit subscribe and notification. We got a great one coming out this weekend. Take a quick look at the preview. For all the talk about what's happening in LA, do you realize that it started with a Democratic assemblyman out there in California? His name is Jose Luis Solchari Jr. And he started filming ICE agents going to work. He started live streaming them, saying that something must be going on because he said he felt nervous and afraid, and he wanted people to come gather and join him. He incited this. They're waving the Mexican flag. They're chanting F ICE. If you love this country and you want to be here and you don't want to be deported, why are you waving the flag of another country? It doesn't make sense. All right. By the way, next couple weeks, Newt Gingrich earlier this week talked about Seth Keshel. He's going to come and talk to us about the midterms. Senator Ron Johnson, former ambassador, national security advisor to Trump in the first term, Robert O'Brien, James O'Keefe, Dan Turrentine, my buddy on the morning meeting, and David Zweig's got a brand new book out on COVID. So just hit that notification button and subscribe. It's going to be amazing. Before I bring in Sharyl, though, I got to tell you, you guys know this. I've made wellness part of my or part of my journey to better health. At the core of everything is sleep. If you don't get a good night's sleep, it doesn't matter all the other stuff you do. That is the one thing, which is why I'm so excited that I introduced Beam's Dream Powder into my routine a while ago. You guys have heard me talk about this if you're a longtime watcher of the show. I literally every night, and I ran out of bed earlier this week. I literally was lying in bed going, I forgot my Beam. I went, took the scoop, put it in water, 36 seconds, 40 seconds in the microwave, depending on what day it is and how much time's left on the microwave. And there it goes. And it's honestly, it is such a game changer. It's got all that natural stuff that I've tried before as a one-off. So I tried melatonin in the past. I tried magnesium in the past. This has it all. Magnesium, melatonin, L-theanine, Apogen, L-theanine, all in one amazing blend. And it tastes unreal. You guys have heard me talk about the coconut cinnamon one. I'm now doing the brownie one all week until that's gone. and then I'll probably switch back. But I'm telling you, the flavors are amazing, and it just gives you an amazing night's sleep. You wake up rip raring to go. It's backed entirely by natural science, and 17.5 million nights sleep cannot be wrong. Athletes, ordinary people, professionals, and right now Beam is giving everyone who listens to the show the Ultimate Patriot discount, 40% off. No tariffs, no trade problems. Beam. It's a great American company, so go to shopbeam.com/Spicer. Use code word Spicer. Any flavor you want, you can pick. It's all you. Shopbeam.com/Spicer, code word Spicer, 40% off. It's a great American company. Invest in yourself. All right, speaking of investing in yourself, there's one I want you to invest in. It's a guy named Leo Grillo, my buddy. He has been with us for the beginning, and he is out there doing yeoman's work when it comes to taking care of animals. Not just dogs, not cats, I mean, everything. It started with one dog he found on the side of the road. He named the dog Delta, dedication, everlasting love to animals. And boy, did that kick off something amazing. If you go to deltarescue.org and just look at the videos, you'll see what I mean. It's just grown and grown and grown out there in California. And he takes in whatever is abused, malnutrition, abandoned. It's unbelievable what he does. And it's not a shelter. I feel like Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's not a shelter. It's a sanctuary for life. He takes care of these things. And it only operates through donations from people like me and you. No government contracts, no USAID grants, political pro subscriptions. I made a personal donation with my money because I believe in what Leo Grillo is doing at Delta Rescue. Please go to deltarescue.org and make a personal contribution to help Leo do all this great work. If you see the estate planning kit, download it, think about it, pray on it. Think about how we can make this an enduring mission. It's so great. DeltaRescue.org. Please do me a favor. Check it out over the weekend when you have a second. Without further ado, I want to bring in award-winning journalist and leader of exposing so much, author of a great book called Follow the Science, and the host of Full Measure with Sharyl Attkisson, Sharyl Attkisson. Sharyl, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Great to be here. Thanks, Sean.
So I got to get your take on how these riots in LA are being covered.
Get down!
Oh! Oh, he got oh!
Because the last several years plus have not been good for media trust. And you've worked, at a place like CBS. You've been around. You obviously have the show now, very successful. When you see the coverage the way it is now, where they continue after everything that we've seen, the Russia hoax, we're going to get into a lot of the healthcare stuff that we dealt with COVID. But just, I can't believe that folks in the media don't at some point say, all right, we've got to be a little bit more straight. And I keep hearing about peaceful protests. We're watching cars get burned. We're watching reporters' stuff get burned and smashed. And yet, there's no sense of, shame.
Well, my industry, as you know, has changed dramatically in the course of the last 20 years. I like to say, as I've written, that any form of communication that can be co-opted by propagandists has been. And that, of course, includes the news media, which has undergone this radical transformation. So I think you have people reporting who are no longer, if they ever were, I think we used to do a pretty good job at being neutral observers of facts and things like that. And that's just not the case anymore at many news organizations. I think reporters are rewarded for taking a particular viewpoint. When I left CBS ahead of my contract, part of that was because many of us felt like, not just me, we were being told to take a certain viewpoint in a story ahead of even gathering the facts or even researching the story. And when the facts didn't come out the way certain supervisors wanted them to come out, they either wanted you to change the story in a way that was dishonest sometimes, or they didn't want to air the story at all if you insisted on being factually accurate. So I know there's got to be an element of that going on at news organizations.
And it's funny because that actually was exactly what I was going to ask you next. So if you're a reporter out there and you're writing about mostly peaceful protests, is that because you, the reporter, do you think, believes in that narrative? Or do you think that you're either pleasing your boss at headquarters or corporate, or are they telling you to do that?
Well, it could be either one. Certainly, reporters are being dictated to, in some instances, how they should term things, as if it's the responsible thing to do. Be sure and point out, mostly peaceful, or they're maybe told that from certain supervisors in New York, for example, and they don't really have a choice if that's the direction they've been given, unless they want to quit or just simply say, as I try to do occasionally, that's not factually accurate. You try to make your case. But then you're likely to be pulled from the story if somebody really wants a particular narrative out and you're not going to fulfill it. So that's the problem with today's news coverage.
There was this clip that I played earlier in the week. I want to play it for you from an ABC News affiliate about what was happening there. And I want to just show it to you and get you to react. Take a look.
Large group of people. It could turn very volatile if you move law enforcement in there in the wrong way and turn what is just a bunch of people having fun watching cars burn into a massive confrontation and altercation between officers and demonstrators.
Now, Sharyl, I don't know you well enough to know exactly what you do for fun. But I don't know a ton of people who go out for fun to watch cars burn in public. So I was shocked by that narrative, the idea that they were saying, aside from people watching cars burn for fun.
I don't even understand that. It sounds like it was a live shot, and maybe he regretted what he said pretty quickly after he said it, or maybe someone told him later how crazy that sounded, because I don't think even, whatever side you're on these issues, I don't think that makes any sense. No.
The other there's a couple big stories in the media, and before I get to sort of big pharma and healthcare that I want to get you to weigh in on. Obviously, the big one this week that didn't get as much coverage as it probably should have is Terry Moran had started off the week over at ABC News going on a 12:06 Saturday night AM Twitter storm on Stephen Miller, talking about that he eats hate and such. What I found fascinating about the story, though, is ABC said nothing. They literally said nothing all week. To this day, have not actually put out a statement or a tweet from ABC PR. They commented on Elon Musk's, the tweets that he put out. But how does a network like ABC get away with not even having to comment? Because what I found fascinating is it's not just that they didn't put anything out, but you would think that other media outlets would be calling them saying, do you have a comment on Terry Moran and what he said and whether it adheres to ABC News standards? And yet here we are 7 days later almost, and nada.
Well, I've been traveling, so I'm not up to date on all the latest news, but I think they did put out a statement, and they said that they basically fired him or decided not to renew.
Oh, no, what? Yeah, but they didn't put out a statement. Brian Stelter from CNN said that this is what's happening. It wasn't, he sort of has a background source at ABC. So you have a quote, media personality at CNN talking about what's happening, but ABC never issued an actual statement or anything. Brian Stelter at CNN says what ABC is going to do, which I think is a pretty weaselly way of handling it.
Well, that is interesting. And, I noticed one thing when I tried to read a little more of the coverage about that, because a lot of news anchors and reporters have made similar statements, if not worse, with impunity in recent years. So I wondered what made ABC decide to take action. And if this is accurate, what I read, they already had let his contract lapse and had not renewed him. They said that, in what I read, this basically tipped the scale. They decided not to renew him, but his contract had already lapsed. That's unusual in our industry. If they're going to keep you, they don't let your contract completely lapse. And it makes me wonder if Terry Moran didn't try to go out in a blaze of glory if he sensed that he was not going to be renewed at ABC. And, certainly his profile raises to some degree if he's looking at a book or another job, if he makes a stink over something like he did, which just didn't make a lot of sense why he did that.
It's almost like he's going full Acosta.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that next week he announces he's going to be on Substack. He's going to have his own podcast, and he's going to be the real guy. I mean, kind of like it was like he was pretending to be a journalist for decades, and now he's going to say, I can finally be the authentic Terry Moran, kind of like how Jim Acosta's going out there on his own. I love the theory because I think that's interesting. But Stephen Miller had initially responded to Terry Moran and basically said that, this was typical of what most journalists think. And then Chuck Todd came after him and said, it's so sad that this administration has no interest to try to bring the country together. They intentionally create division is how you win short term and lose long term. A patriotic, like they're basically saying, hey, this isn't actually what Chuck Todd's answer was. Don't try to group us all into what Terry Moran did. It's an isolated incident. And Stephen Miller's basically like, no, you're all the same. He just said the quiet part out loud. Do you think that that Stephen had a point that this isn't just Terry Moran? He just got caught at 12:06 a.m., probably after a couple pops, saying what he believes. And Chuck got very defensive, thinking, well, it's just a one-off. Like most of us aren't like this.
Well, the attack saying that most of us aren't like this was itself sort of in the same vein as the original, accusation, wasn't it? And I think we have plenty of evidence that many in the media do feel that way, because some of them have made no secret of it. And as I said, have expressed these things with impunity. I'll even go a step further and say we've seen, as I tracked in recent years, so much misreporting and factual errors on one side against Donald Trump and those who support him. And yet those reporters, there was a time, I would say 15 years ago, when you made major media mistakes like that you'd lose your job. And instead, reporters like Maggie Haberman at the New York Times and others, when they prove to be conflicted or biased or wrong with their anonymous sources, are continue to be promoted and given headline status. So I think this is more than just a one-off with Terry Moran. I think we know that this is something that's grown pretty pervasive in the mainstream media.
The other big media story this week is the Associated Press was ruled against by the courts. Currently now the White House can keep them from being in the Oval Office or Air Force One, but they have to be allowed into the big rooms, the East Room, etc. From your journalistic background, is the White House on the right side of this, or is the AP?
Well, I'm mixed on this issue because obviously as a journalist, I really tread lightly in thinking the government should do anything that limits journalists in any way. And if I'm correct on this, and Sean, you may know more, the fight the White House picked with AP was AP refusing to say Gulf of America, when in fact, I think there are many more substantive and important things to take beefs with over at AP, which has become, practically wholly owned by propagandists and those on the left in the pharmaceutical industry and so on. I'm not sure that was the fight to pick over naming, whether they're going to use a certain name for the Gulf of America. So I'm a little mixed on that. I do think we've put the administration and Donald Trump in particular in the position with so much misreporting and false reporting and bias that he's in the position of feeling as though if he doesn't do something, there's nobody neutral who's going to stand up and do the right thing. So he's taking actions, and I covered this on my show Full Measure, that appear to be clamping down on a free press. But even Frank Sesno, an analyst at George Washington University I interviewed, said, to the extent that this makes some in the media more careful about the mistakes they've made when Donald Trump is actually coming after them and winning some awards and settlements, that can be a good thing. If it goes too far and makes journalists chilled and fearful of doing accurate reporting on somebody, obviously that's not something I want to see.
Well, first of all, I love your show, Full Measure. It's so the topics that you hit and the way that you cover them. It's so missing in the environment, in the media landscape. And I love how you choose topics and then how you cover them. So when you look at a story like this, what would be an example of clamping down on the First Amendment or on the press?
Well, there's a question as to whether if reporters begin to feel as though they have to curry favor with the administration in order to get ordinary access. Now, Donald Trump is so accessible, it's hard to argue that you're not getting access if you're kept out of a room. But in general, if reporters start to feel as though they curry favor to get access and that must be done or else you and your news organization will be cut off from ordinary and routine access, that's something that could be an unintended side effect or consequence of going after the media, understandably, for the things that they've done wrong. So I guess I don't have a simple answer as to where I stand on all these issues, but.
No, and I think it's a fair point, but I would argue that if you think about what what Biden did by restricting conservative media and shutting out certain outlets versus, say, Trump, to your point. I mean, think about how accessible he is. How many of those reporters are, at the Marine One or in the Oval Office? I mean, you look at the daily pool report. You've got the Huffington Post. I would argue that if you think about Trump, he's more transparent, more accessible than any president in history. Whereas Biden did more to restrict press access writ large and against one ideological side.
Absolutely. I think you can't argue against the notion that Trump is the most accessible president that we've known, certainly in my time. And so it makes it harder, I think, for AP to make the case that, boy, if we are limited in certain ways, the public suffers and we don't have access, because there is so much access on a daily basis with this president and his administration.
Yeah. All right. Before I get into some of the pharma, healthcare, MAHA stuff, there was a hearing this week that I didn't hear a word about until I saw you give light to it. And it was a hearing that James Comer had in the Oversight Committee that I literally, until I saw Sharyl Attkisson post about it, I was like, I didn't know about this. And it was about 23andMe and potential privacy concerns. And you wrote in your newsletter, he stressed that 23andMe and all companies handling genetic data must ensure that there is no legal path for adversaries or hostile entities to exploit Americans' DNA. The committee, he said, will consider legislative solutions. And I think to myself, like in the military right now, you are not supposed to use 23andMe because the idea is we don't want our adversaries to have critical data on service members. And I was like, this is a big, big deal. And I think the question to me is, explain why you think that this is so important for us to understand.
Well, I have to dig into this more. We've covered this issue a bit on my TV show, how China has gotten access, its foot in the door to so much that may seem benign, but ultimately they're gathering grains of rice in their efforts, that span 100 years to collect intelligence and to try to become dominant in so many ways. But I think the answer as to why you don't see many in the media picking up on what to the people is an obviously big and important story is this transformation I've spoken about in the media, where it used to be that we didn't wait for someone to tell us what the story is. We didn't wait for propagandists or, let's say, websites and nonprofits and political figures to tell us what the marching orders are for the day. We went out, at least I did as an investigative reporter, and I still do. I listen to people. I try to find great issues that matter to people. And I'm not taking my cues from what these organized forces would like us to report. But I can tell you, many news organizations and many TV shows do exactly that. If this is not going to, for whatever reason, 23andMe or some other story, serve a particular interest in the right way, and they're not going to put it on the plate of those they contact in the news media every day, it's just not going to make it into a position of prominence. So I think those are super important stories. And one of the most valuable things we can do is find those stories and still try to report them in a good and accurate way, especially these stories that mean, these health stories, as you mentioned, that mean so much to so many people and impact so many people, but aren't getting the due coverage because they're not being put on the plate of the media every day as part of the daily diet.
I hate to interrupt the conversation, but if you're a snacker like me, do I have great news for you. Do you know that up until the 1990s, most snack foods used tallow? And then when they switched over because of big food, suddenly we found all this inflammation and metabolic gut issues. Well, guess what? The answer is now MAHA chips. If you have not tried these and you're a snacker like me, you are going to absolutely love these things. MAHA chips have only 3 ingredients in them, so you can eat them. It's almost healthy. They are that good for you. And I cannot believe the different flavors that come in. Original, blue, lime, habanero. It's unbelievable. You don't need to put up with the choices that you have now. You've got a healthier alternative. MAHA chips. No seed oils. No seed oils. It's unbelievable. Skip all the bad stuff. Get MAHA chips. They're crunchier. They taste better. It is unbelievable. They are beloved by thousands of customers and are already endorsed by industry-leading health and nutrition experts. Are you ready to give them a try like I am? Go to mahachips.com/ MAHA.com/Sean. Use code Sean, SEAN. I spell it the right way for 25% off your first order. And trust me, I would get the variety pack if I were you. They're that good. That's MASAchips.com/Sean. Use code word Sean for 25% off MASA chips. A story like 23andMe and the potential privacy concerns that so many people face who've handed over their DNA to this company. And issues like TikTok and the amount of information, to your point, rice, grains of rice that China is now collecting on each and every one of us. Do you think that a lot of reporters shy away from it because they don't know it? Like, in other words, they're fearful of the topic. Like, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole that I'm not familiar with because I'm worried about it. Maybe AI or something like that. Like, I'm worried that I don't know enough about the subject to tell it right. Or are they maybe worried about backlash from China or outside forces?
Well, I'm not sure the actual news reporter on the street is worried about China, but certainly the assignment editors or the bosses that are making the assignments may have narratives that they're trying to further or not further. And so the assignments may reflect that. In other words, that's just not going to be a story that gets on the air that day. If someone suggested, they're going to say that's not what we want. You know, on evening news, not that many people still get their news from the evening news, but in a half hour, they have 22 minutes or so to cover the news. And they won't say to you, we don't want to cover 23andMe if you bring up the subject. They will say, gosh, there's so many stories today. We don't have room for that one. Maybe tomorrow. And the story never gets told if it's not told in the way they want it to be told. That's sort of how the soft censorship happens.
So let's move to a subject that you've been leading the way in, and it's sort of the healthcare, science, like all of this vaccine stuff. I want to just start from like a very high level. Do you think that like this administration and the MAHA movement is getting it right, and how's it going overall? Like, are they getting after the right issues, or are they missing the mark?
Well, in my opinion, RFK Jr. is on the mark, and he's probably one of the most well-informed, despite the media misreporting, maybe the most well-informed political figure on a national level on these topics. Because I don't know if people know, he's a lawyer. He's litigated against pharmaceutical companies. He's gotten discovery and seen their secret documents. He's had successful lawsuits. He's studied this for decades and knows this inside and out. It's embarrassing to watch him as reporters debate him, and they're clearly uninformed and haven't done their research, or they've just swallowed the propaganda. And yet they're arguing against him with his knowledge, and they have so much certainty in their incorrectness. Again, it's embarrassing, but they don't know enough to be ashamed. So I think he's doing his best in his position to get it right and to tackle the things in a reasonable and rational way. And I cheer on the idea that the things he's doing will help make ordinary people safer and get us out of this medical establishment juggernaut that we've lived under for decades, as the medical establishment has been almost wholly controlled by the vaccine and pharmaceutical industries.
You know, like, I don't know, a year and a half ago, when RFK really came on the scene, he was talking about red dyes, forever plastics, metals in some of our food. And I don't think many people took it seriously, fluoride and the overuse of it, right? And then in the past, like 4 months maybe, especially since he officially took office as HHS secretary, I'll turn on a morning show and they'll talk about the dangers of red dye. They'll talk about ultra-plastic foods. And I feel like somehow the same people who mocked RFK and the MAHA movement are like slowly and quietly mainstreaming the issues that he brought to the forefront. Is it just because it's now kind of overwhelming how clear the dangers are there, or there's more science available? But I get a kick out of the same people who kind of mocked him now kind of are mainstreaming the issues and the concerns that he brought to light.
There are still mocking things going on. You know, MedPage, which has been bought out by the pharmaceutical industry, will often air propaganda and investigative reports that has misinformation in it on these topics. But you're right. I, too, have seen mainstream news outlets and local news tackle issues in a fairer way than they did before. Clearly, they didn't understand when they misreported on them before. I mean, this is one thing that kind of gets me that as journalists, there are very few topics that we have firsthand information on. So what you need to do is attribute, if you're going to make a declaration or statement, where did it come from? Who thinks that? But too often these days, the media has gotten where they just say something as if they know it's true. This is safe. This is unsafe. This is crazy. This is not true, without attributing that. And they're wrong so much of the time. Well, like you say, there's sort of the force of momentum, because there are a lot of studies and there is a lot of data supporting many of the things that RFK Jr. talks about. But those studies and that data, they've been controversialized, they've been censored. And now I think there's just a bit more of an outlet for them. But I also say the COVID experience, as you probably know, turned a lot of people into more active consumers, people who never thought to question what was in their food or what the government was telling them, suddenly realized if the government's lying to us about this, then what else are they not telling us the truth about? And they became people who never considered themselves activists, have become activists on these issues. And that's really changed a lot.
See, I think you just put your finger on it, because too many times I just always assumed, well, if the CDC or the FDA say it, of course they're looking out for me. So I'm going to trust it, right? And you think about so many things in our food, like it's like, oh, well, that's heart healthy. That's safe. The funniest thing is, as a fair-skinned Irishman, I go to the dermatologist every 6 months so that I can help put my dermatologist kid through college. And after seeing a bunch of stories on sunscreens, I said to her at one point, hey, I'm seeing these stories that like some of these sunscreens have a bunch of like bad things on them, and I'm putting them on my skin, and there's actually, it may be counterproductive. Like you're preventing a sunburn, but you're then putting a bunch of chemicals in your body. And she goes, yeah, that's true. And I go, wait a second. At what point was somebody actually going to say this? Like, why are we doing this? And I feel like, again, the FDA, like, why is that? If that's the case, and this is something just as simple as sunscreen, but if you're telling people we need to stop cancer and burning your skin and all this, so put this on your face, and yet there's a other adverse effect, they're adding these harmful chemicals, then why? I mean, it blows my mind, because I'm thinking to myself, wow, I'm doing a great job. I'm protecting my skin. I'm preventing cancer. And it's like, sure, but you're also then putting a bunch of bad stuff on you that's going to cause a whole bunch of other things.
I hate to say this, but everything's like that. You have to just start to understand that the information you're getting from the medical establishment and elsewhere is largely put in front of you. It's like, as one person in this industry that gets the information out told me in The Smear, one of the books I wrote, it's like we're writing a movie script, and the information that crosses your path on a daily basis about you should put on sunscreen and all of that, without the counterbalance of the information, somebody wants you to think that. Somebody wants to put that out there. It's not by accident. And, I turn around and I think almost everything's like that. So it makes me, when I see these common narratives I've learned just based on experience and history, to consider that the opposite of what they're telling you may be true, or at least you're not getting the full information. You can almost count on that, particularly when a narrative is so pervasive that everyone in the media or medicine or whatever, they're all using the same language, referring to the same experts as if there's no other side to the story. You can count on the fact that somebody is making that happen, and that should cue you to try to find out more information, maybe on the other side of that issue.
In your last book, Follow the Science, you really dig deep into the role of Big Pharma. And one of the things that we see in Washington, D.C. is a lot of people start their morning reading, one of the newsletters. Axios has a newsletter. Politico has a newsletter. And I keep tweeting out that they keep, like, they make it very obvious. They're funded by pharma. Literally pharma, not a drug company, not some, like they say, presented by pharma. How concerned should we be? Give us the flip side. You as a journalist with the experience that you have, when we see stuff like that, I got to imagine that if you're a reporter at one of these places, that you can't help but notice, okay, my salary is being paid for by pharma. I got to be careful.
That's true. I think I saw sort of a shift in the early 2000s, before the pharmaceutical industry had as firm of a hold in America's newsrooms. They were influencing us from the outside with strong-arm tactics, with calls to the legal department, with their PR firms and crisis management firms and third-party nonprofits doing all of this arm twisting. But then it came to be, that I think somewhere along the line, they understood, they have really good PR people and strategists, that they could get in the newsrooms and they could, actually have personnel who are interested in their interests working in America's newsrooms and providing stories. And also by buying all the advertising, as you point to, all the ads we see, that it would come to be understood without them even having to step in and do very much. It would be understood by the newsrooms where their bread is buttered and what stories they should avoid putting on TV. And I saw that happen because I was there at CBS when they assigned me to cover some of these stories that are hugely impactful to ordinary Americans. I mean, prescription drug use, when the drugs are used as prescribed, is always a leading cause of death. You don't hear much about that. There's so
wait. Whoa, hold on. Say that again.
Prescription drug use, when drugs are used as prescribed, is a leading cause of death. It's been number one on some polls in many years, and it continues to be one of the lead causes. We're so over-medicated, and medicines have their flaws. I mean, certainly some save lives and have done great things, but in general, all of them have side effects, and we don't know how they interact together, and we're taking so much. But this is something that's not widely recognized today. Well, CBS was assigning me to cover, and many other reporters were doing it at the LA Times and the New York Times, Washington Post at the time. We were covering drug side effects. Congress was holding hearings. We were doing vaccine safety question issues. There's so much to report. And then about the same time, Congress stopped investigating and the news stopped reporting. And I started getting, after being told to cover these stories, it started to be that my immediate bosses still wanted them and liked them and saw them as hugely impactful. But somewhere else at the network, they were getting calls, for example, from the advertising division. I've read about some of this that I learned only in hindsight, but we were getting lobbied and called, and there were secret meetings with pharmaceutical industry people and some producers at CBS, and all that changed. So it went from little influence to a lot of strong arming, as I say, to then just sort of a soft censorship where reporters still wanted to cover these stories, but they learned that those stories were not welcome if they pushed them. Their editors, their bosses would not put them in prominent positions. It was not going to get you, promotions or your contract extended. That, the news bosses wanted something different. So you learn to avoid those stories when they don't want them or they're not going to get on the air.
Was there ever a moment when you had a really good story or a lead on something in this realm, in the pharmaceutical realm, where somebody made it very clear, hey, Sharyl, I get it. Great story, but we're not going to be able to get, was there a specific instance where it's just not going to happen?
Dozens and dozens and dozens, because I fought the good fight with the help of a lot of great bosses at CBS. This was a big push me, pull you inside the news organization among those who wanted to continue to cover the news fairly and impartially and cover these important stories, and the reach that was coming in from outside the news division. And, one of the biggest ones that at one time, the people at CBS, the editorial folks, assigned me to cover vaccine-related controversies and thought that they were hugely important. And then that came to be something that was considered an untouchable topic if you were going to look at vaccine safety. So it was always the same story. It remains today one of the biggest and most important stories of our time. And yet it went from being very welcome and very important. And, viewers certainly liked hearing about these stories that are frequently covered up and not reported, to then all of a sudden we knew that was not welcome. So they would say, well, put it on the website. I don't know why it's better on the website, but when they wouldn't want to air something on the evening news, they would say, write it up for the website. For a while, I got a lot of important stories on the website that I couldn't get on the air. But even then, there's a lot of pushback and a lot of conflict. And then, where we are today, if you look at 60 Minutes online, you're going to watch a Pfizer ad usually before you get to see a segment. I mean, it's at least you see the Pfizer ad, and I hope people can put two and two together, because a lot of times the influence is pretty invisible.
You have this story in your book, Follow the Science, about the smallpox vaccine. You spent a lot of time covering the military, and look, I know from firsthand experience, it's like a guinea pig thing. They did this with the anthrax, where they would just sort of be like, you need this, and that's how it works. You just get your series of shots. What did that experience explain to viewers? What happened with respect to the smallpox, and what that did to you overall?
That was a seminal experience for me because I had never questioned or thought about vaccines. My child was fully vaccinated. I was probably over-vaccinated from my travels with the military. They don't care what vaccines you've already had. They just shoot you up with whatever they, think you need and don't even tell you what they're giving you if you're going to travel with them on some kind of deployment. And then all of a sudden, after 9/11, the government was considering restarting smallpox vaccine, which they hadn't given in years because smallpox was considered eradicated. And the vaccine actually has more side effects than ordinary vaccines, can be very dangerous. So they weren't giving it routinely. But now there was the thought after 9/11 that our adversaries could use it as a biological weapon. So let's think about deploying smallpox vaccine among civilians. First, though, they said, let's do first responders and the military. So that's where CBS sent me to cover that story. Knew nothing about it. And then I started hearing questions about how careful we had to be. This is from the government's own advisors, how careful we had to be with a restart because the smallpox vaccine was so potentially problematic and dangerous, could cause myocarditis, heart attacks, things like that. And I didn't know any of this. I remember thinking, I didn't understand biologically how vaccines worked. It sounds naive in retrospect, but I didn't understand that they could do these things. So that opened my eyes. And then I saw the government cover up when my colleague David Bloom of NBC died of a blood clot, which is considered by many to be a side effect of the smallpox vaccine and other vaccines. When he died of a blood clot while he was deployed with the military during this time period, and he had gotten a smallpox vaccine as well as anthrax vaccine, and nobody reported his death as a potential adverse event at a time when they were supposed to be tracking carefully every single military person or civilian getting this experimental smallpox vaccine. I exposed that I will say, covered it up or failed to report it to the database. After my story, they ultimately did add David Bloom to the database, and they stopped giving smallpox vaccines, not just because of David's adverse events, but because other people were having problems, and there were several deaths. But it opened my eyes because I remember thinking, if the government is covering this up, like to your face, something so important, then what else could they be covering it up? And I said to one of my really good sources on this who worked with the government, gosh, if occasionally a strong military soldier or a strong civilian soldier who was a football player in high school can drop dead or get very sick from his military vaccines, what can happen to a baby? And it had just not occurred to me before. And this advisor said to me, you're not getting me to touch that third rail. And I didn't even know it was a big controversy to ask the question. I later learned you're not even allowed to ask the question because of the implications for the industry. But that kind of started me down an interesting road where I was curious, did a lot of research, and, to this day, continue to report on these really important issues.
I remember David Bloom and the Bloom Mobile and all that. To be honest with you, I had never realized that was because of that. Is his family, like, does everyone now, is this settled science, as the left likes to say, that that's the cause of death?
Well, interestingly, someone convinced his family that he had a genetic predisposition and that therefore exonerated the vaccines. But what people don't understand is if he had a genetic predisposition for blood clots or the type that he had, that puts you at greater risk for the vaccine side effects. It doesn't exonerate the vaccine. Some people don't understand that. And I remember thinking initially that his own network, NBC, was not reporting what I was reporting. Broke a lot of news. It made international news. It was not controversial in terms of no one questioned what I was reporting at the time. And so I contacted his family for a comment. And I thought they certainly would want to know about this. And they didn't speak to me. And to this day, they continue to do outreach. At least last time I saw, his wife does outreach for a disorder of blood clots, a nonprofit type thing. But she appeared on I think it was NBC years later, talking about David's death and advocating for a blood clot foundation type thing, appearing side by side with a pharmaceutical industry, vaccine industry representative. So they've partnered with her. And I can't tell you exactly what happened in that case, but typically you could expect them to swoop in when they see a PR disaster like David Bloom's death possibly linked to smallpox vaccine. They swoop in and talk to the family and make sure they say things like, you don't want to be responsible for babies dying if they don't get their vaccines. They say these things to you off camera. It makes you think, maybe I shouldn't tell the truth. I don't want babies to die. I don't want babies to stop getting their vaccines. And, You have to really think long and hard about all of this before you can cut through or slice through the propaganda that they're really laying down on you to try to control these narratives and let the facts about this not get out.
So all that being said, what do we, and I mean, you wrote extensively about all this in Follow the Science, but like, what is the lesson that we need to take away? Because it's not just David Bloom and smallpox and anthrax from years ago. Like, we just went through this with COVID. So what is like the lesson that we as citizens need to take away from our COVID experience going forward?
I hope this is changing, but in recent years, and this advice was given to me years ago by someone working inside a government public health agency, and he was kind of kidding, but as I think back, he was probably spot on. He said, when the government tells you to worry about a public health risk, you probably don't need to worry. When they tell you not to worry about something emerging, you probably need to worry. And if you look back at the last decade or so, that's actually been exactly true. So I would say, take the information that you're being fed with a grain of salt. And as I said earlier, when all the narratives seem to be the same and they're not giving you another side or more information, or when they're trying to censor people who have differing viewpoints, other doctors and so on, that should lead you to do some independent research on your own. And I know people don't have time to do that in every case. That's what the news media was supposed to do, distill this information for you, because people lead busy lives and they have jobs. But right now in this era, I'm going to say that people have to do a little bit more of their own due diligence to try to get at the truth. And I've got some suggestions in the last chapter of the book, thanks to my book editor at HarperCollins, who suggested always giving useful information, where you can go to start to try to cut through and get some reliable sourcing. For me as a journalist, one of the things sounds obvious. I look back to sources who are correct about things in the recent past. That's who I may rely more heavily on in the future. And as simple as that sounds, we saw after Dr. Fauci being wrong about virtually everything, the media is still continuing to quote him front and center after the COVID pandemic as if he was still some authority, and still controversializing the very good doctors and medical experts who are marginalized but had been correct about the things that they studied. So I would tend to, I slice off the ones who are wrong, and I tend to more often rely on the ones who have a good track record. So I've listed some of those resources and places you can go to at least get another side or more information on emerging health issues and controversies.
The last thing I want to ask you about is this week, Bobby Kennedy fired everyone from this vaccine board. And one of the reasons he did so was said that there's massive conflicts of interest. Obviously, this is something that you've been at the forefront of exposing as well. How big of a deal is this, and how bad are the conflicts of interest?
The conflicts of interest are just unacceptable. And I remember years ago when I learned that many of the FDA advisors on their outside advisory committee are connected to the drugs and the companies that they're making recommendations on. And when I asked why that was okay, it was said to me by government people, well, they're all connected to somebody, so we can't find any truly independent people. So these are the subject matter experts. And as long as they disclose their financial conflicts, then that's all the best we can do. I disagree. I believe those people are elevated to those positions because they have those ties, and that's all one hand washing the other. With the Vaccine Advisory Board, I did the story, and I think this is one of the worst things I saw that was never resolved, that the CDC advisors took part in one of the biggest frauds upon the public early in the COVID pandemic, that Representative Thomas Massie caught them putting out false information about the original COVID studies, falsely claiming, the CDC did in writing, that those original studies proved that even if you already had COVID, you'd benefit from the vaccine. The studies showed the opposite of that. And when Congressman Massie caught them in this lie and recorded them on the phone, which I played on my TV show, they admitted he was right and they were wrong after much cajoling on his part, and yet continued. The reason I say lie, I use that word almost never because it requires you to get in the mind of somebody. But the CDC, after admitting to him in the phone conversations that he was right, that their information was incorrect, within a day or two, they had a webinar with medical professionals where these same scientists and officials at CDC, the very same ones who admitted to him that their information was wrong, gave the false information again in a webinar to officials and medical experts and so on online. So there was no doubt they knew they were getting false information. The false information that I'm talking about had been signed off on by the entire vaccine committee. So either no one on the committee that looks over vaccine safety read the studies that Thomas Massey read and that I read the original studies and yet signed information saying this false information was true, or they read the studies and knew that this directive coming out from CDC was false, but signed it anyway. All the explanations are unacceptable. Nobody was ever held accountable. CDC didn't speak to it. The board didn't answer how they could have made such a terrible mistake. And these are the kinds of things that happen, I think, more often than we know about with medical issues beyond even vaccines.
Just unbelievable. All right, guys, if you want the full story and a lot more, you can read her latest book, Follow the Science. It's available on Amazon or wherever you get your books. Always tune in on Sundays. I love Full Measure with Sharyl Attkisson. Sharyl, thanks for being with us and being so kind and generous with your time. Keep up the great work. I love what you do every week. It's one of my favorite programs. After my blood boils on the regular Sunday shows, I tune into Full Measure just to get a sense of what's really going on. So thank you for everything you do.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks for having me.
You bet. All right, guys, what a great conversation. It's Friday, so I have a great newsletter at SeanSpicer.com. I mentioned at the beginning of the show how many great guests we have. Please do me a favor. Share the link for this show to 5 friends. Go to SeanSpicer.com and sign up for that newsletter as well. I appreciate you guys being here. I'll see you back here on Monday on the Sean Spicer Show. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.